Good afternoon.
Right, let's start this one. Thanks to everybody for coming. We've got Dr. Alan Williams with us, calling in from the States. Which state are you in?
In Mississippi.
Right. Big River.
That's right.
Right, Dr. Williams is going to be here. Do you actually like people calling you Dr. Williams, or this is just Alan?
Alan, please. Yes.
This
Far
is
better.
this is the gripe that Dr. Ingham had with me for quite a while, because I do like to respect the fact that people have put in a lot of work into their education and academic, achievements, and you do have plenty of those when you look at your academic work. And it took me 3 years or so over the relationship with Elaine, and then she just got mad at me and say, just right.
Yeah.
Okay. Would you like to say a few words, who you are and what we'll be talking today?
Sure. I can give just a quick introduction to who I am. So I was born and raised on my family's farm in South Carolina. And I represent the sixth generation. They've been there since 1840. And it was actually a branch of the family that moved down from Virginia at that point in time. So the family in Virginia has been there since the early 1700s. So we have a rather long history in agriculture in our family in the U.S. I am a mix originally of English, Scotch, Irish, and a little bit of German. So that's my sort of family background there. I ended up spending about 15 years in academia as a researcher and a professor after I went away to college. So I got a bachelor's and master's in genetics and physiology from Clemson University, and then a PhD in those same subjects at LSU, or Louisiana State University, and then spent 15 years in academia. I left academia in the year 2000 and went back into private business full time. I am a farmer and rancher in the states of Mississippi and Alabama now, and we do that regeneratively. So we do practice what we preach, so to speak. And we obviously have a company called Understanding Ag that is a global regenerative ag consulting company. We also are founders of the Soil Health Academy, which is our educational arm. And we teach academies both in North America and across the world. And we also founded a regenerative verification company called Regenified. So those are basically the three entities up underneath the broader Understanding Ag umbrella. We work in all 50 states in the US, throughout North America, and 42 other countries globally. We have worked in practically every environment in every agricultural enterprise that you can imagine. So we do have experience across a very, very broad scale of landscapes and environments and ag enterprises. In the US alone right now, not counting acreage or hectares across the world, in the US alone, we're currently working across about 33 million acres that are under regenerative transition. So we have grown the number of acres impacted quite significantly over the last several years. And we work with not just directly with farmers and ranchers, but food and fiber companies and many other types of companies that have an interest in regenerative agriculture and advancing it, as well as agencies, institutions, and so forth. So that's a quick introduction, and I'd be happy, Daniel, to dive into questions, whatever we want to do here.
Yeah, so I'll lead a little bit, and the first one is, what are the sort of outcomes that you work towards when you take on a farm?
So first and foremost, profitability. Okay. Nothing else matters if we can't be profitable, right? And again, because we ourselves are independent farmers and ranchers, we understand that. You've got to be profitable first, and so that's always number one. But all of the other, there's a number of other things that we work on and look at. Obviously, we look at significantly improving soil health, and as we go through our hour today, we can talk about what all that means. But we focus heavily on soil health. We focus heavily on ecosystem restoration, on biodiversity, on water cycling, mineral cycling, those types of things, input reduction in an effective, efficient manner. And we also focus on human health. So that's really, really important to us, that human health is a critical aspect of this. But we do all this by first clearly defining each individual farm's context. That is really quite critical. If we do not first focus on context, then it's going to be very difficult to apply what we call the 6-3-4. And Daniel, we can dive into that at some point, but the 6 principles, the 3 rules, and the 4 ecosystem processes, we have to first define context. So profitability and context are absolutely at the top of the list.
Right. So in terms of that context, you obviously have worked on in many different scenarios. There's going to be pastures. There's going to be arable. Is there any? Do you see any patterns in terms of the size of the land mass that you work with, in terms of like who are your largest followers, largest clients in terms of the area that you operate on? Is it mainly pasture? Is it mainly arable? Is it just basically a random mixture of all of these things?
That is a great question, Daniel. And the truth of the matter is, it is very much a mix. Do we work a lot in livestock and pastured situations around the world? Yes, we do. But that being said, we work equally as much in a wide variety of cropping situations. So row cropping, from grain crops, corn, soybeans, small grains, all of those types of things, to vegetable crops. We work very heavily in fruit crops, nut crops, specialty crops, herbs, mushrooms, all of those types of things as well. So it's pretty broad spectrum. We work across the board in pretty much every phase of agriculture. There's very, very little that we don't have experience in.
Mm. There is obviously in terms of the actual area, you're probably going to be working more in terms of the pastures and arable, right? Not necessarily in sort of the top fruit or nuts or herbs, right? And I've got one specific question already, because there's a lot of talk about coexistence of grazing animals and arable crops, and there are areas in the States where you have that coexistence, and then there are areas in the States which are very specialized. Is that something that you feel impacts the success of regenerative transitioning, or is that something that you can work around regardless?
Okay, so first and foremost, anytime you can integrate livestock, you are going to greatly speed up your rate of progress. No doubt. We've seen that over and over. And it doesn't matter whether you're talking about row crops, you're talking about, orchards, vineyards, any of those types of things. Whenever we can integrate livestock, the rate of regenerative progress speeds up dramatically. However, that being said, not every farm can successfully or feasibly integrate livestock, and we understand that. So where you cannot, then you must have a really strong focus on diversity And that's diversity in a couple of primary areas. Diversity in the cash crop rotations, if at all possible, and if it's a perennial crop like most nut crops, fruit crops, vineyards, things like that, then we understand the lack of plant species diversity, but you can still have it through cover crops. Okay, you can't have it in the cash crops. Now, if we're row cropping, we can have a lot more cash crop diversity as well as cover crop species diversity. So diversity of plant species is really key there, as well as minimizing disturbance. So in the absence of livestock impact, those are going to be the two key things that we've really got to focus in on to be able to allow us to make as fast a progress and as good a progress as we possibly can.
So basically rotations in min-till or no-till.
That's correct. Yeah. Now, the beautiful thing about regenerative is that every tool is still in your toolbox. So what we don't tell people is you can never till again, or you can never apply a herbicide or a pesticide or insecticide, whatever. We don't tell them that because regenerative is a journey, not a destination. So all of your tools are still available to you. The biggest question with regenerative is, if I use a particular tool, how is that going to impact my regenerative progress? And I got to fully recognize and understand that. And is there an option? Is there a better option? If there's not, at that point in time, then you can still use that tool. But what you want to do is you want to make sure that you follow it up with really good regenerative practices, so that over time, if it's a tool that has the potential for destruction, like tillage and chemical applications and these types of things, over time, you absolutely want to be weaning yourselves down from the use of those tools.
Okay, I've got a very specific question to drill down into that, actually. What would be a situation where the farmer would need to use tillage, when they started to go minimal till or no till, they're going down the path they would like to continue? What would be the reason for them to go, do you know what, I have to till?
Okay, so let me give you an example. So, one of the very best things that a farmer can do initially when they're starting down the regenerative path, and they've been heavily focused on monoculture production and very low diversity in that monoculture production, is they desperately need plant species diversity in there through some type of highly diverse cover crop. And oftentimes that soil, quite frankly, is not ready yet to be successful with no-till. Okay. The soil's still heavily compacted, heavily plated. It is still biologically poor. Water infiltration rates are still pretty poor. And if we try initially to establish a successful, highly diverse cover crop through no-till in those types of soils, it's going to be difficult. And so I would rather see, at that point in time, I would rather see you till and establish a really good diverse cover crop mix so that we don't have to till again. So it's far better to till initially to establish a really good cover crop mix and get it growing well than to try to no-till it in and it's very minimal or marginal in its growth.
Okay, so this is basically very specific. Yeah, thank you. This is very specific scenario. The follow-up question to that, and I'm going to move on from there as well, would be the use of biology. Obviously, we're the soil ecology laboratory, so we work with these biological solutions. Is that something that you've worked a lot with? Is that something that you would advise people to add, when they are actually putting those cover crops in, to help with that compaction, or is that irrelevant in your view?
Okay, so that is a absolutely loaded question, Daniel. and boy, we could probably we won't, but we could spend the rest of our hour just on that alone. But I would welcome offline questions from anybody, in that regard. So very quickly, let me start by saying we have done many years of research and are continuing to do, field trial level research on actual farms, not, small plot university research station type research, but real life research with many, many different types of biologicals, compost, so on and so forth. So we do test a whole lot of things, okay, and we do it intentionally. And we do this by having test strips. So first and foremost, if you're going to try anything on your farm, put in test strips so that you know whether it really works or not. If you just go buy a soil amendment or biological amendment or whatever, or even a compost and just apply it broadly, you really don't have a clue whether that gave you any kind of beneficial impacts or not. You've got to have test strips. So you've got to become your own researcher on your own farm. It's the only way that you can really determine whether something's going to work for you or not within your context and your native biology. And you got to test it more than 1 year, folks. 1 year is 1 year. And if you're going off the results of a single year, you could be completely wrong. So you've got to test things more than 1 year. So do test strips so that you know whether something's really working or not. And secondly, always have a zero control check strip where you apply absolutely nothing. Okay. Absolutely nothing, because you want to see what does just the native biology and all of that do compared to anything else that I apply. So that's one of the approaches that we take. But here's what we have found in a nutshell, is that if it's a live biological product that you're thinking about buying and applying, there's a whole host of things you got to consider here. First of all, is it still alive when you receive it at your farm and you apply it? We've received many, many, many different biological products. And as soon as I receive them, I'll open, pull samples, send them to a third-party lab immediately to do an analysis. And unfortunately, on way too many of those products, we find out that as soon as they arrive at our farm, 90+% of the biology in those products is already dead. Well, that's not going to do me any good. I'm applying dead biology. So you've got to be assured, number one, that you're applying live biology if you're going to do any good. Secondly, way too many of these products are extremely limited in the total number of microbes that are in them. They may have 2, 3, 4 species of microbes. So let me ask a question. How many microbial species are there in the soil?
Lots and lots and lots and lots.
Okay,
more
than a million.
I'm just going to say basically to people on this call, I did not pay Alan to say these things, but he's actually exactly saying what we say here and what we're trying to do, because every time we go out to do anything with farmers, we suggest controlled trials, because we don't ascribe to anecdotal evidence and push snake oil. We basically want data. So that's one thing. And we appreciate how difficult for a lot of farmers this can be. So that's why we try to find ways around it, with grants and whatnot. But the other thing in terms of life biology, it's something that, we've set out to do. And pretty much at the moment in the UK, we have the only live biological product that is actually delivered just in time. So it's interesting. It's interesting that you've just said that. Thank you very much. I will give you your commission afterwards. But
I actually had no clue he was going to ask that question. So in full disclosure,
this is just pure coincidence. This is water for my mill. But it is something that It's something that I would definitely love to speak to you more about in depth. Maybe not for this conversation, because obviously you've spent so much time to do these trials and you've got some data. If we could basically talk about that at some other occasion. So
Absolutely.
so we don't necessarily have to repeat everything, although we have to do stuff in the UK anyways. But at least we've got something that we can show to say, oh, look, there is control trials, available.
Yeah.
We can actually show something. So that would be useful to talk about. I'd like to basically then just bring it back to the more general sense, because obviously you have come up with a number of a set of rules for yourself to go by, which gives you a framework that you can work towards. Would you like to talk about that now?
Absolutely. But before I dive into that, let me just say one more thing about use of any type of biologicals or compost or anything like that. When you're applying something that potentially has living microbes in it, if you want to take advantage of those, you must apply it and then also follow that up with the principles and practices that I'm getting ready to detail. Because again, remember, these are living, breathing microbes. And if you're buying and applying these, but still continuing very conventional practices, they're going to die. So you're absolutely wasting your time. So they have to be married with regenerative principles and practices for them to have the biggest impact for you. So that leads me to the 634. And you can go on our website at understandingag.com and you can see a lot of information about this. I also have a recent article posted on there called the 634 Explained. But we developed this through hardcore, boots on the ground experience. This is not academic theory that I'm getting ready to present. We didn't develop it that way. We developed it through many decades of sheer trial and error and coming to these conclusions. And after coming to these conclusions, we have used the 634 as our foundational basis for working with farmers and ranchers all over the world. And we've proven over and over it works. No matter where you're located, no matter your climate, no matter your ag enterprise, no matter your soil type, none of that matters. The 634 applied within context works. So what is the 634? Well, the 6 are the 6 principles of soil health. Okay. I'll list those for you real quick. Number 1, context. Number 2, minimize disturbance. Number 3, keep armor on the soil at all times. Keep the soil covered. Number 4, living roots in the ground. Number 5, diversity. And number 6, animal integration. So those are the 6 principles. The 3 rules are the 3 rules of adaptive stewardship. And they are, number 1, the rule of compounding. I'm going to very briefly define each of these 3 for you. The rule of compounding means that in farming and ranching, in nature and biology, and even in our human relationships, there never are any singular effects, ever. Everything that we do, everything that we say, every management decision that we make, everything we apply creates a whole series of compounding effects. And these effects are never neutral. They're either positive or negative. So the question we have to ask ourselves as farmers and ranchers is this: am I making decisions that are creating positive compounding effects or that are creating negative? Because it is one or the other. Make no mistake about it. And we don't need to fool ourselves about that. So that's a rule of compounding. The second is a rule of diversity. And when we talk about diversity, we're talking about diversity across a broad array of facets. We're talking about diversity in the soil microbial population, diversity in the macroorganisms that are on and in the soil, diversity in our plant species, diversity in our beneficial insect and pollinator populations, bird populations, wildlife, crops, livestock. For some reason, over the last 8+ decades in agriculture, we have almost come to the conclusion that we need to be highly specialized in monoculture this, monoculture that. And that has created a whole host of issues for us. And we find that when we move back towards increased diversity, absolutely everything gets better. It's more profitable. We reduce inputs, and even quality of life is a lot better. And then the third rule is the rule of disruption. And this rule is very, very important for ongoing progress. What we mean by that is that nature is incredibly resilient. But to continue to build that resilience instead of nature stagnating, there have to be planned purposeful disruptions that are introduced. And think of it like this. So think of it like a human athlete. For any of you that have been athletes, and I was one as well, but for anybody that was an athlete, we know that to continue to make progress, we cannot do the same exercise routine at the same duration and intensity day in and day out, year in and year out. If we do that, we're going to quickly hit a wall. We're going to quit making progress. And then not only are we going to quit making progress, but we're also going to start going backwards in our athletic performance. So every athlete knows that to continue to improve in their athletic performance, they've got to continuously alter their exercise routine purposefully. So they have to introduce planned purposeful disruptions to get better and better as an athlete. Well, we're biology. And if we respond that way, do we not think that all the biology that we deal with out here on our farms and ranches responds the same way? Well, of course it does. So and it's called acute stress rather than chronic stress. Acute stress builds and strengthens and increases resiliency. Chronic stress kills. Okay. So to be successful in regenerative agriculture, you cannot be prescriptive, hence the rule of disruption. If we are prescriptive in nature, at that very point, we have just become non-regenerative and non-adaptive. We cannot claim to be regenerative if we're prescriptive, because prescriptive will take you immediately away from being regenerative. So that's the rule of disruption. If we want to spend some time talking about various types of disruptions, we can. And then, so that's the 6 and the 3, the 6 principles, the 3 rules. And then the 4 out of the 6, 3, 4 are the 4 ecosystem processes. And those are the energy cycle, sunlight, photosynthesis. In agriculture today, we have this severe lack of ability to capture sunlight. We have a lot of what I call wasted sunlight or photosynthetic leakage. We want to capture as many rays of sunlight as we possibly can by a plant solar panel. So the energy cycle. Second, we have the mineral cycle. And that is the ability of all of this incredible array of minerals in our soils to be able to fully cycle and feed our plants and hence our animals and everything else. Then we have the water cycle. We need a fully functioning water cycle. And then the 4th one is community dynamics, also known as diversity. So the one thing I want you to note, diversity is one of the 6 principles. Diversity is one of the 3 rules. Diversity is one of the 4 ecosystem processes. So that's how important diversity is in being able to be fully regenerative.
It's interesting. It's interesting. Thank you for this summary. It's interesting, as you were saying, my mind kept going to Bill Mollison and permaculture principles, basically. And I'm wondering sort of how far does your approach sort of hit against, a certain ceiling where beyond that, we're going permaculture, Mark Shepard style, we're growing, nut trees and having pigs running around in the orchard. So it's just an aside, because I think there is a level that we're not really going to cross as a society as farmers, sort of like economically, to be able to sort of move in that direction. I don't think everybody's going to suddenly switch their morning cereal to a nut mix overnight. So, but it's interesting. It's interesting that there's these parallels that that seem to be sort of, you know, going towards that direction.
Mhm.
There are some questions actually, and if you don't mind, I'll start reading some of them out. Maybe Bill Grayson is asking, what situation would justify the use of herbicides such as Roundup?
Okay. So we personally, we use no chemicals of any kind anymore on our farms. None. We've been able to completely eliminate all of that. But in the early stages, there's a handful of examples. So, you know, if you're just getting into cover crops, if you're doing, you know, row cropping type situations and so forth, just getting into cover crops, then you may need, before you really understand how to work with those cover crops, how to do things like roll down and plant green and other things, you may need to use some herbicide burn downs, you know, prior on that cover crop prior to planting the next cash crop, so that you can have a successful cash crop. So there can be some circumstances and situations where you may need to initially use some herbicides to help you as you get started. Uh, but often what we do is we cut those rates significantly from the recommended rate and still have a high level of success. And we look very carefully at the type of herbicide that we potentially may use. You know, I think everybody by now understands that, you know, glyphosate is a patented chelator and a patented antibiotic. And so glyphosates are going to tie up or bind minerals because they're a chelator, and glyphosates are going to damage, you know, microbes in the soil because they are a patented antibiotic. So, you know, if we recognize and understand that and understand why we may be using a herbicide at a particular point in time, but again, anything that you use like that, whether it's tillage or a herbicide, the whole goal here is to use it only if we absolutely have to at a particular point in time to continue to make progress, but then make sure we're following that up with principles and practices that greatly minimize and then eliminate the use of it in the future.
Okay, if I can then follow up with that, on the flip side, what's your favorite way? Let's say we're talking about the temperate zone, obviously, because we're in the UK. What's your
Mhm.
favorite way to manage an arable field in a no herbicide, no tillage application? What is the process and what equipment would you need?
Yeah, so you've got to be thinking about, you know, how are you going to terminate the cover crop, right? As you get ready to put in that next cash crop, and there's, you know, a handful of ways to do that effectively, and we, like I said, we use no chemicals anymore at all. So obviously we use other means to terminate, you know, annual crops. One is through a grazing. You know, we use what we call a severe graze to terminate that. Now, does it mean it completely terminates it? No, it does not. We just want it below the economic threshold of the cash crop that we're going to follow it with. Okay, you know, we've gotten into the situation with all of the herbicides that are available to us now that, and look, having been over there and worked with farmers over there, they're no different than farmers over here in this respect. You know, everybody expects to have completely clean fields, right? And you're viewed as a bad farmer if you don't have completely clean fields. Well, we've learned we don't need completely clean fields. Okay. That's not necessary to be profitable as a farmer at all. It's not necessary to have good yields. And it's just something we've talked ourselves into through the last several decades and convinced ourselves of that we need. So, you know, if you have livestock and the ability to have livestock, then a fairly severe graze, you know, at the termination point of that cover crop and a trample So we like to go at high stock densities that also give us a high degree of trample. And then we can plant the cover crop. Now, there's a benefit to that, or the cash crop, excuse me. There's a benefit to that because if I follow the planting of my cash crop after that graze, what have my livestock done that's going to help me? They have, first of all, they've trampled that cover crop. So that's going to cause a slow degradation of it and a slow release of nutrients through the growth of my cash crop. Secondly, my livestock are applying a lot of manure and urine that is needed fertility for that cash crop and gets that cash crop off to a great start. And then third, my livestock are shedding billions and billions of microbes per acre back onto the soil. And it's the same microbiome that's in the soil. So I'm creating what's called microbial quorum sensing and heightened microbial activity that's going to benefit that new cash crop. The other primary method that we use, and many others are using now, is rolling down and planting green. So we just simply need a roller crimper. I prefer a roller crimper with chevron style blades on it. We want that cover crop to be at pollination stage so that we can get a good crimp and a kill on it. So timing is critical here, and planting species that are going to, pollinate at about the same time in that cover crop mix. And then we can go in with our roller crimper and roll this down and no-till drill right into that. And often what we do is we do it all in one pass. So we place a roller crimper either on the front of the tractor or on the front toolbar of our no-till drill, and we roll and crimp and drill in the same pass. So we're one pass planting in the spring. We don't have any additional passes for getting our crop in the ground. And when you look at that, that's incredibly beneficial, especially when we look at the cost of labor, fuel, parts, depreciation, repair and maintenance. All of those types of things today are much higher than they were just 3 and 4 years ago. So I save a lot of money if I can get my spring crops in a single pass and not have to do 3 or 4 field passes to accomplish that.
And in terms of the readiness of the cover crop for crimping, I've heard opinions basically about suitability of the cover crop, the type of plants that you're planting, the stage of growth. What sort of comments would you be able to share on that?
Yeah, so yes, that's all important. That's part of your context. See, this is why you must understand your context, and you really have to know what you're doing here. What we tell people is you've got to take the time to educate yourself in regenerative agriculture and in the 634. The honest truth is, while conferences and workshops and field days are great, and they at least begin your education process. That's not going to supply you. There's no way you can listen. You're listening to me right now for an hour, but look, listening to me for an hour, folks, is not going to prepare you to go out and do everything you need to do. I'm just going to be flat. And there's no one in the world you can listen to for an hour and know everything you need to do on your farm within your context. But this is why we provide and others provide extensive follow-up. So we help farmers evaluate their context and then their crop rotations and what are the right cover crop mixes that are going to address all the resource concerns between individual cash crops, and what cover crops are going to allow them the heightened, the most opportunity for success in being able to, not have to use the herbicide and incorporating into that. So, and yeah, if we do either a trample with our livestock or a roll down, that gives us a very high degree of weed suppression, no matter what you may have in your seed bank, but a very high degree of weed suppression for that subsequent cash crop. And again, it's not about being weed free. That's not what we really need to be aiming for at all, in spite of what we've been taught and told by all our neighbors. But it is a matter of not reaching that economic threshold. so that we're not damaging the profitability of our cash crops.
So just drilling a little bit into that question of what would be a suitable cover crop to roll down, because it's not really an issue if I do have livestock and I can trample anything with chopper mob. But this has been coming up, and this is, it's something that is also an issue in terms of availability of equipment in the UK. Equipment sellers, manufacturers, they don't really there's not many which are geared towards this sort of these sort of procedures. So I've heard people using rye as a cover crop that can grow tall enough to then be crimped, properly crimped. Is that the only thing that you would use? You would use something else? Is there a mixture of things that you would use? How would you go about that?
Well, there are certainly mixtures, and the small grains all work pretty well. Yeah, so I can plant a mixture of small grains, not just cereal rye. Yeah, I can plant other small grains in there as well. I can plant oats. I can plant some barley. I can think about some triticale, wheat, various things that can go in there. But often I'm definitely going to include some legumes in there. Certain types, and again, that's going to vary according to the prior cash crop, the next cash crop, all my resource concerns. And I know the immediate response to that is that, well, wait a minute, Alan, we're not going to terminate those legumes with a rolling crimping, a lot of them. That's correct. I'm not. I don't worry about that. Okay. Why? Because those legumes can grow and coexist with my cash crop and actually help to feed my cash crop. Again, this concept that we've had for too long now, that we don't need anything else growing in with our cash crop, or it'll rob our cash crop of vital water and nutrients, is wholly incorrect, folks. As a matter of fact, it's quite the reverse. We have better water infiltration and retention, better nutrient cycling overall, when we actually have more than one thing actively growing in there with our cash crop. So we need to rethink some of the concepts that we've had, and we certainly find that to be the case in our orchards, and our groves and our vineyards, things like that, where over the past several decades we've sort of had a scorched earth policy, where I don't want anything growing in my orchards but my trees. Well, we're finding that those trees are far healthier, far more productive, and we've been able to significantly reduce input costs, irrigation applications, synthetic applications, pesticide applications, and so forth, by having robust cover crops growing underneath my trees and in between the rows of trees. Everything works better, and it's not robbing our trees of water and nutrients. It's actually supplying them far more of both. So, nature doesn't work that way, folks. And I don't know how we started developing this concept. And again, remember, I'm a scientist as well, and I'm questioning the science of that, y'all, to be quite honest. I have under my belt more than 100 peer-reviewed articles during my scientific career. So I'm well published in that regard, and I clearly understand peer-reviewed research and how to do science, but we've been doing it wrong, and we've been reaching very wrong conclusions. And as we kept doing that, we kept feeding ourselves as scientists to reach more and more wrong conclusions by the very nature of the way we designed our research trials and projects. We are inherently biasing and skewing ourselves from the get-go just by the design. And we're not even, if you look at the vast majority of peer-reviewed research out there that tells us we need to do it this way versus what I'm talking about, they don't even mention soil biology at all in the peer-reviewed research. They never measured soil biology. They never made comparisons with diversity versus what they were doing, okay? So they don't even have the comparisons. So they're inherently reaching erroneous conclusions because they lack real data, real observations in the very way they designed their research.
And then on the flip side, there's also papers that have discovered some very interesting things, and when you look at basically what the researcher actually did afterwards, they moved on to a different subject. It was basically shelved, put into a drawer. Nobody ever looked at it again. And there's lots and lots of gems just hidden in there. And
Yes.
we don't have
Yes.
enough hours in the day to even read through it, not let alone actually do our own trials. I wanted to drill a little bit actually in terms of the transition period. When you say about obviously we're trying to increase infiltration rates, what is your philosophy of dealing with compaction? And because obviously it's easy just to think, let's put some cover crops and they'll deal with compaction, but there's no plant on planet Earth that can go through 150 psi, and for us to see 300 psi of compaction is quite easy just outside there in the field. So do you have a process? Do you have favorite processes to deal with that? How would you go about that before I move on to other questions in the chat?
Okay, so first and foremost, you're correct. You know, these plants with their roots, it's hard to deal with anything above 150 psi. But what can deal with more than 1,000 psi? What can deal with that?
Fungi.
There you go, mycorrhizal fungi. Okay, so the strategy is very simple. And this is what we lack most. We have done biological testing, microbiological testing on hundreds of thousands of fields. And we have found that in today's agronomic world, the vast majority are severely lacking mycorrhizal fungi. They have plenty of bacteria. As a matter of fact, they're bacteria centric, but they are severely lacking mycorrhizal fungi. Mycorrhizal fungi can break through those heavily plated and compacted layers. And of course, they produce biotic glues that glue soil particles together to create aggregates, to open up pore space and all of that. So our first focus is always, let's look at getting plants in the ground that form strong mycorrhizal associations, and then let's give them time to form those mycorrhizal associations and for that aggregation to occur. And then as we transition to our next cash crop and back and forth, we've got to keep these mycorrhizal colonies going. We can't keep destroying them every year and rebuilding. We've got to keep them going all year long, year in and year out.
See, this is another thing I'd love to spend some more time talking to you about, because establishment of healthy microbial communities is something that we need to crack for ourselves. I'd love to pick your brains on that at some other time. I'm conscious of time. Do you have time to go over this hour with us, or do you have a strict cutoff?
I can go about 10 minutes over, but then I do have another meeting I have to be at. So
okay,
yeah,
understood.
Yeah.
No problem. So I'll try to go through some other questions then. Christine says, our friends at the Soil Ecology Lab are keen on accelerating the development of soil ecology. To what extent do you think it is possible to accelerate soil succession by the application of biological amendments?
Okay, so that goes back to what I was saying before. What biological amendment are you going to apply? And how many total microbial species does it have in it? What's the concentration, the CFUs of those microbial species? Are they even alive when you apply it? And then what practices and principles are you following that application up with to assure yourself that the living biology that you just applied is going to stay alive and multiply, replicate, so it can continue to function and do you any good? So all of those you have to pay careful attention to. And are you even applying the biology that you really need? Okay, that's the other thing. So almost all of our agronomic soils are already highly bacteria centric. So if it's predominantly a bacterial project or a product, you really haven't done yourself much good. You need products that are highly fungal and have protozoal populations as well to do much good. And so you've got to be, what do they have in them? Again, it's the big question. And again, So if I apply a product that's mycorrhizal in nature and I want it to colonize, that means first and foremost, I got to have plants with roots growing in the ground that associate with mycorrhizal fungi. Okay. So that's first and foremost. If I don't, you haven't done any good. Okay. Secondly, if I then go in there and I apply, you know, fungicides, herbicides, or I do a lot of tillage, I've just totally destroyed the mycorrhizal fungi I just bought and applied. So all of these things are things we have to consider. It's not an easy, straightforward question. You've got to really know your context and you've got to really know your product that you're going to put on. Not they're in no way, shape, or form are all of these products created equal.
Great. I'm just trying to you mentioned the important Phil is asking, you mentioned the importance of diversity. Are you moving towards polyculture cash crops?
Absolutely. We are. And we've been able to do that fairly successfully. So, we own a seed cleaner. And so we can plant polyculture crops. And we're going to look at crops that are going to mature at about the same rate. So we can harvest them all together, right? In that polyculture, and then harvest them all together and then run it through our seed cleaner to be able to sort and separate everything. So an investment in a seed cleaner helps a lot in that regard, and it opens up a ton of options for us. And we also are planting polyculture crops to feed our pastured livestock, such as our pastured poultry and pastured pigs that need supplemental feedstuffs. And we don't even need to sort that. We can just feed it straight as it's harvested.
It's a nice diverse mix. It's not a
absolutely. It's a diverse mix from the get-go, and we focus on what we plant to get the protein and energy that is needed and there for them. Yeah.
Great. Dermot is asking, we have been organic for 20, 30 years. We have a weed burden. I would like to no-till, but we don't believe we can compete with the weeds unless we plow about 10 inches. The compromise was a shallow plow, about 4 inches. How do you deal with tough rooting weeds such as docks?
Okay, so first of all, the plants we call weeds, and I'm gonna correct that in just a moment. But the first thing I'm going to say is that a weed is a weed is a weed, basically. Okay, and the way that we deal with that is we must increase diversity and then do some of the things I talked about earlier, where we can roll down to where we are suppressing those weeds through the roll down mat, that natural mulch that we're creating over the top of the soil. But secondly, we have to realize that any plant that is growing there at any particular point in time is actually growing there for a reason. Every plant, and there's books that you can read, such as Weeds and what they tell us, weeds control without poison and so forth. Every weed is growing there because of some type of issue in the soil, and nature taps that weed at that point in time to correct that issue. So the first thing you have to realize is that look at what's growing there. What typically tends to grow as your problem plant, and then take a look at why it is growing versus a whole host of other weeds that are in your seed bank. You don't have just one or two weeds in your seed bank. You have dozens and dozens and dozens, but yet not all of them grow at an equal pace and at the same time. Only certain ones do. And again, it's because nature is trying to repair something. So look it up. And again, you can go to our website and other places to look this up, but look it up to find out why that particular weed is growing there. But again, diversity is your key to controlling those. Right now, tillage actually promotes weeds. Okay. The more you till, the more weeds you're going to have, and the more weeds you're going to fight, and the more you're going to till. So it becomes a vicious cycle. So the only way to break out of that cycle is to look at diverse cover crops and then look at either trampling down with livestock or rolling down so that we can start to gain control over those.
Great. This is a loaded question. David Owen is asking, when establishing new crops, what would you say is least damaging? Plow, till, and broadcast, or apply herbicide and no-till drill?
Okay. So again, the answer depends on your context at that point in time. You know, and the answer could be for you at a specific point in time, either one of those may be the best to use. So it's not that one is necessarily more or less damaging than the other. They all are damaging in some form or fashion. Okay. Once my soil has at least a certain level of aggregation and can work very well with no-till drilling, then if I have to use anything, I'm gonna choose a little bit of herbicide over tillage. Okay. Because then I'm going to undo a lot of good things I just did once I moved to successfully moved to no-till. If I have to then till, I'm going to undo a lot of very good things that I just did. And I can undo less things with a reduced rate herbicide, with a cover crop. So I'm going to select the herbicide over the tillage once I've made a full transition to no-till.
It's interesting that in the previous question you were saying about what is the weed, why is that weed growing and not the other? And I just have to go back, to that permaculture thing, because basically it's again something that people in permaculture say, and it's, I started my journey into this from the permaculture aspect, and I saw that permaculture in the UK was a solution looking for a problem. Farmers were not looking for that sort of really radical change, but a lot of these principles that people have sort of put together in permaculture seem to have seeped into the regenerative practices, and it's quite actually interesting that you do look at the weeds as indicators of what they can actually tell us. Right. Emma is asking, what would you advise as a future vision of region design of farms to mitigate the challenge of increased temperature and water scarcity, i.e. shrink the size of field machinery, increase hedge and tree cover, etc., etc.? I think she's referring to potentially climate change effects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the answer to that one is very simple, and we have the proof. And as a matter of fact, lots and lots of proof. And we've even presented at international symposia a lot of this proof. But good implementation of the 634, period. If you are intentionally implementing the 6 principles and the 3 rules, you're not going to have to worry about this. Okay, because they are going to increase your water infiltration, your water retention. They're going to increase your water cycling, your mineral cycling, your photosynthetic capture, the resiliency of those crops against climate extremes. All of those types of things are going to happen. So that is really the way that we combat, all the impacts of climate change, is through intentional implementation of the 6 principles and the 3 rules to maximize the 4 ecosystem processes. And so again, look at those 6 principles. Ask yourself, where would you score yourself on all 6 of those principles? On minimizing disturbance, on living roots in the ground, on armor on the soil, on diversity, on livestock integration, all of those things. Where do you stand on that? How would you score yourself? And the better you do at that, the better you're going to be able to build resilience against climate change. Now, here's the deal too, and we know this. Once we can get regenerative practices on landscape scale, enough acres, contiguous or close by acres, we are literally changing the climates in those areas. And again, we have hardcore proof of that. And I've done international presentations on that. So we have the data to back up exactly what I'm saying. We can change our climate if we influence this on enough acres. Now, if you just have 100 acres or 100, hectares even, you're not gonna change everything around you. But if all of your neighbors are also doing this, and now all of a sudden you have 10,000 hectares, okay, and that are close to being contiguous that are doing this, now you can start changing your microclimate across those farms, and we've proven that it does happen.
It's interesting. One of the first things that actually pointed me towards permaculture and then agriculture as a solution to climate change was the work of Willy Smits in Indonesia. I don't know if you've ever come across that guy. He basically literally changed the climate over an area of land by repopulating the whole ecosystem. Shadia is asking, can you tell us the mix you use for your livestock? I want to do something similar and curious to see what you do. I'm sort of thinking that you're going to go, it depends.
Absolutely, it does that. And so I can give you, first of all, I can't give you a mix that we use because no two mixes are ever the same. We never plant the exact same mix ever. Okay. Year after year. It's always going to be tweaked and refined based on our current context and what we really need at that point in time, what our soil is telling us, what our resource concerns are and all of that. But if you're looking at, and I guess I have to ask, are we talking about a perennial or an annual mix here? If we're talking about an annual mix, if it's a cool season, I'm going to want at least 3 small grains in it. If it's a cool season mix, annual, I'm going to want at least 3 legumes and at least 3 forbs of some type. Those can be brassicas.
I can actually help you. I should dive into that deeper because there's another question of Shadia's that was in terms of transitioning a pasture field into horticulture crops. What would be the best practice in the opinion? No-till horticulture. So she's probably working with horticulture annual crops.
Okay. So, again, what we're going to do, and this is how we do it. We look at your soil biology. So we do soil biological testing. And then we do another test called the Haney test to combine with that. And we look at, your current context, your desired context, and then that is going to determine the specific mix and the specific proportions and rates of each that we're going to plant on an annual crop. So we never give anybody sort of a general or canned mix because it may or may not work for them. We work with individuals to first determine their context and then design a mix specifically for them and their situation. And that's the way we always have to do it if we want to be successful. I'm just simply not going to give a canned mix because it 9 times out of 10 it probably will not work for you.
So again, I'll pay you your commission later. What sort of biological testing do you do? Since I'm going to say it out loud, we're a lab and we provide services.
So one of the things that we do is a PLFA test. So that, but really what we need to know is what is the biology and the proportion of that biology in the soil to each other, right? Whether it's a PLFA test, we also use, metagenomic analysis as well. So we work with a couple of labs here in the U.S. that are doing metagenomic analysis. So that allows us to look a little deeper into the biology. So we combine those two. And then, of course, the Haney test, where we're looking at a whole host of things. We're looking at the elements, but we're also looking at CO2 respiration, at microbially active carbon, organic carbon, carbon to nitrogen ratio, all of those things. And then we combine those tests together and the data that we get from those to be able to accurately determine, what types of crops or cover crops we really need to be planting.
Great. So I'm going to use it to plug us, guys. If you need more understanding, actually, what's happening in your soil, we do have a multi-perspective way of seeing that. It's not necessarily the cheapest thing to do. So it's only for people who are really serious about doing that and have a bit of budget. Last question, I think that's going to tie this very well. Matt Griffin is asking, what will it take to enable a system change across our whole industry, a wave of change? We need financial support and social support, in brackets, mental health.
Mhm. Yeah. So globally, the top three barriers to adoption to regenerative agriculture are: number one, lack of awareness and education. You can't implement what you don't really know. So, what you're doing today is a part of educating yourselves. And I encourage you to continue to do that, because that is the way that you're going to be able to, overcome that particular barrier. That's why we teach the boots on the ground soil health academies, right? Is to be able to help overcome that barrier. So lack of education and awareness, you got to resolve that. Number two is peer pressure. And again, I told you that I'm sixth generation. I grew up in agriculture, and I can tell you that peer pressure is very, very real in agriculture. And having been there in the UK, guess what? Y'all have tons of peer pressure. I saw it. I experienced it. And so, you're hard on each other if you do things differently than your neighbors or other family members. I saw that when I was over there. It's no different over here. We are too. So you've got to be able to overcome peer pressure. How do you do that? By reestablishing another network of support. You got to have new peers and new mentors, that help you overcome the peer pressure that is going to come your way. And you got to have the thick skin, to be honest with you, to get over that peer pressure as well. So we work hard to help the people that we work with to reestablish a network of peers and mentors and so forth that you can rely on. Go out and visit each other's farms often. Okay. Get off your own farm and go visit others as much as you can, because you learn a lot when you do that. Support each other. And then the third is debt load. And we see this in way too many places around the world. Debt load among farmers is the highest it's ever been. And it certainly is here in the US. So we help farmers and ranchers to be able to understand how to significantly and in a judicious manner reduce that debt load. So those are the top three barriers. And so, Daniel, we work to eliminate those three barriers so that they can be highly successful. And what we have found is that when we do that, and we track this, we monitor this, when we can eliminate those three barriers with the people that we work with, we have a greater than 92% success rate. 92% of the farmers succeed in this effort.
Alan, thank you very, very much for your time today. Again, we will definitely reach out to you to have some more conversations at some other time. This is a recording, so this will be posted, and also to everybody who registered and all of our other contacts, this will be sent out as a recording. And also I'll share your details, so if people in the UK are ready to contact you to get some help from you, they can reach out. And just, on that note of peer pressure and finding another support group, I just want to remind everyone that we are here every Wednesday on Zoom, and it's free, and you can come and talk to people who are basically like you. Everybody basically that joins these meetings are early adopters of this methodology, and we're just here to chat about what everybody's doing. So that's, your one thing to get that support. We're here for you every week. And we welcome what you're sharing, and we share whatever we can with you as well. So again, Alan, really thank you very much for sharing. You definitely have opened up more questions in my mind again to get some answers from you. And I've got those 200 papers that you've sent me. I've put them onto the drive, and we need volunteers now to read through them. So talk to us as well if anybody wants to go through all of the papers that actually Dr. Williams has shared with us. So thanks again, and to everybody else who joins us on Wednesday. See you next week, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Super.